The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program for this week. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie and Bishop Doc Loomis. And welcome, guys. Good to have you with us.
Morning, sir.
As we bade farewell this past week to Mark Woods, Reverend Mark Woods, who's going off to Greenville to be an associate pastor at St. James in Greenville. Let's talk about our first article for today. And this, Doc, you brought this to our attention. It comes from Christianity Today. Is that where it's from? I think.
Yes, that's right.
And it's called A Second Historic Christian Cathedral Hosts Buddhist Ceremonies. And it is written by Ruth Gledhill. And the dean and chapter of York Minster today defended the practice of Buddhism in Minster buildings as details of Buddhist ceremonies in yet another of England's most beautiful and historic cathedrals emerged. York Minster and the Zen Sangha was a group that meets for meditation and to explore common ground between Zen Buddhism and the Christian faith. Commenting on concerns arising from emergence of the details at Pentecost, the Dean of York said that the Zen Sangha group has been granted use of the meeting space in the Old Palace, the Minster's Library, located in Dean's Park, for the last 2 years. They do not and never have met in the cathedral. The Zen group is not a religious order of any kind, and the chapter of York would not give permission for any such religious order to be set up at York Minster. Now, this obviously includes some English and British terms that we don't necessarily understand here, but Doc, illuminate us on this.
Oh, as the token Anglophile in the room.
Yes, that's right.
So I was just at York Minster a couple of years ago. It's it's one of these classic, massive stone things with dead knights on graves inside and everything.
Right.
And they explore
Kind
a
lot of churches in America
with a lot of dead knights on the floor.
Knights.
Yeah. So they have been exploring these things for years. In fact, this group has been there for 2 years. And their argument is that Zen, Buddhism, and Christianity have a lot in common. And can you guess where that argument came from, Robert?
No, I can't.
It came from one of your favorite people, Thomas Merton.
Oh,
Thomas Merton, the wonderful convert to Catholicism, who then became a Trappist monk and lived right across the border in Kentucky at Gethsemane Monastery. As he got older, he became, quite famous. He wrote his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain, and Thoughts in Solitude, and a number of other works. But the thing about him that was very interesting is the older he got, the more interested he got in the art of meditation, because he was a contemplative. And he believed in the unity of faiths, and that in contemplative activity, there could be a unity that couldn't be arrived at in worship or in meeting or even agreement on theology, but that in a contemplative situation, he and a Buddhist could perhaps come to some mind meld.
Right.
And as he got older, it was, he's there in the late 50s, and it's in the early 60s that the Roman Catholic Church is going through its Second Vatican Council, and the Pope makes a very specific statement about the need for unity and to have conversation among all of the faith groups. And, of course, this plays right into where Merton is. I feel like I'm telling a story here. But what Merton does is he hops on a plane, and he goes over to Asia, and he begins studying with the Buddhists, among others. And so this man, who is revered by Catholics and by Christians generally around the world, actually got to a place when asked, he said, "What I want to do with my life is become the best Buddhist I can." So this is the genesis of this in the Western Church, and it's something that we see a lot here in the United States. It's a big story here because it's York Minster.
Right.
Why are we letting Buddhists in our church? Well, they're not. It's a group of Buddhists who are practicing Zen Buddhism, which is a high emphasis on rigorous meditation, and they're trying to kind of recreate that Thomas Merton mind meld philosophy.
This I was wrong in saying Christianity Today. It's actually Christian Today, which is the British counterpart, I believe. So in this they talk about how some of the monks, 8 monks, spent 3 days to build a sand mandala in the one of the sections of the church. And you may have seen this. It's popularized recently on a TV show. I believe it was actually on House of Cards. A sand mandala is made and then it gets destroyed shortly after that. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so it's a beautiful work
multicolor
of art.
Sand.
Yes.
Put in circles
Very
and
intricately.
patterns. Very intricate.
Yeah. But after it was made, the cathedral offered opportunities for anyone age 5 or older to take part in workshops with the monks. That has drawn probably some of the criticism, I think, in here. It says at the end of a Church of England clergyman, Peter Old, an influential evangelical, told Christian Today that the use of mandalas by Buddhists is not just as a work of art, but an act of worship. A mandala is an icon of the Buddhist view of the spiritual makeup of the universe, and its creation is accompanied by a liturgy that is the antithesis of Christian cosmology. Is that argument now placing a different strain on this, Robert? I mean, is this an idea? We talked before about other faiths using different buildings, obviously, Christian buildings, and is this an issue? Do you see this as a problem?
Yes.
Okay. That seems very.
Well, you're really
qualified.
missing Mark right now, aren't you?
A qualified yes, perhaps.
Yeah, it's pretty qualified. I mean, look, there is nothing wrong with education, instruction, learning about other religions. We need to know about other religions. We need to know how they operate. We need, to a degree, be willing to understand where they're coming from. This is very important in being able to be a Christian, to talk about your faith.
Right.
You need to know what are the fundamentals of their faith? What is it that they do? So I have as seen as an education opportunity for the Christians to learn more about other faiths that are around them in their communities. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But
it does seem to be different from, say, inviting a rabbi in to do a Passover meal in a Christian church.
That's right.
Because of our roots.
That's exactly right. So, if you don't know the intentions of Buddhism, where Buddhism is going, the ultimate reality of Buddhism, and what it leads to, it absolutely contradicts the arrow of time of history that Christianity talks about, that it's a straight line, it's not a circle. And a lot of Buddhism contradicts much of what is in Christianity. So, except perhaps in the area of contemplative meditation. I, back in my New Age days,
Yes, right?
I used to play around with this stuff.
I was going to say you could do the lotus position at one point
I
in time.
mean, yoga and all of that, it's all very similar, and we tend to say, hey, it's just art or it's just exercise, but not to the real practitioners of what they're doing. There is a spiritual dimension to every bit of this, and so we have to know that. We have to be wise about that.
Well, I think
it's
brings
good
up-
to ask questions.
Yeah, the question, for example, I was at another Methodist church, attending another church one time, when somebody brought up that they had a friend who would like to know if our church would be available for them to teach yoga. And I said, well, the exercises of yoga versus the spiritual side of yoga, which is it going to be?
And can you tease those apart? That's the debate.
Yeah. So and again, then also, Doc, isn't this a question of, well, we understand the building isn't the church. I mean, but the building does have some sacred nature to it.
Well, not only is it a sacred space, but the building sends a message. When you put something in a sacred space, you are allowing it to be for your people sacred. You're saying, we accept this, whether it's an unholy thing or an unholy thing or not. We're saying, by bringing it in, this is now holy. It's confusing at best, and it's blasphemous at the worst. So all of us have to be very careful. Now, there's not a church in town that doesn't have sinners walking in and out of it all day.
Hopefully.
Yeah, but
That's where they're supposed to come.
Exactly. But I think, most of us are coming into the church in the hopes of seeing transformation and receiving forgiveness. This is not a part of the Zen tradition. The Zen tradition really doesn't have anything to do with that. This is an old it's not old by, was this the Tang Dynasty is when Zen came into being. Mm-hmm. And this is just a way to sit and meditate on goodness. And really, in my worship experience, the best thing I can do is come into the church and sit and meditate on my sin and God's goodness.
Yes, godliness versus goodness.
So, and Peter Uhl, the fellow who's quoted here, and Ruth Gledhill are both friends. They've been writing along the Orthodox line for years. And when this started happening in the U.S., they wrote these same kinds of stories. The U.K. is their home, of course, and it's a real big deal because it's York Minster, one of the oldest cathedrals in England.
So again, I think we may see this as something very remote, but I think in many ways our churches are often asked to whether or not we should accept these fringe elements or some element that is not Christian into our church, and how do we deal with that too? So again, I think it's pretty instructive. We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. And I wanted to look at two articles here about the same event, but they're taken from two different angles of the same event. And the first one comes from CatholicSun.org, where the headline is "People of Faith Must Advocate for Religious Liberty, Says House Speaker," and speaking about Paul Ryan. The second article is LifeSiteNews.com. The headline is "Vatican Cardinal Rebukes Demonic Attacks on Family at Washington Breakfast." They're both talking about the Catholic National Catholic Prayer Breakfast that was held this past Tuesday. And Robert, I just think right off the bat, it's fascinating that that reporters of the same breakfast would come up with two completely different kind of headlines and angles to take for this story.
Well,
both Catholic reporters.
Yeah, and both Catholic, and both of the speakers were Catholic, but they had very different messages to a degree. I mean, there were some similarities, but maybe in delivery, content may have been similar, but the way they presented it was quite different. So the political smooth words of Paul Ryan and how he communicated about his interpretation of these things, and then the not so political
truth to power
yeah
words from the Cardinal.
It was pretty fascinating.
Let me start with the Paul Ryan angle first. People of faith have the responsibility to advocate for their faith, not only through good works, but also in spiritual realms, one being through prayer. U.S. House Speaker Paul Ryan, Republican of Wisconsin, said May 17th. He made the comments at the 12th Annual National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, which drew a record high of about 1,300 attendees in downtown Washington Hotel. Ryan and Senior Constance Veit, is that how you say it? Communications director for her religious organization, the Little Sisters of the Poor, were special guests at the breakfast. Keynote speaker, Cardinal Robert Sarah, prefect of the Vatican Congregation for Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments since late 2014, addressed the topic of marriage in the church. He said it's a responsibility of the church to demonstrate to others how marriage should look within a Christian community. Now, contrast that with the article that begins with the Vatican Cardinal. It says Cardinal Robert Sarah slammed the gender ideology, same-sex marriage, and transgender bathroom policies at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast on Tuesday, describing them all as demonic attacks on humanity. Bishop, these are two very different angles to this story.
Well, Paul Ryan is what we call a politician. And politicians talk about things like religious liberty. Cardinal Sarah is a man of God, and he talks about the judgment of God and sin. And so there are two completely different stories here. I love, what did we discover? He was from Guinea?
Right,
Cardinal Sarah,
Guinea-Bissau, yeah.
And the Africans this is how they view things. Things are quite black and white. There's very little gray in Africa, as I know Robert knows from being there many times. This is a very clear statement from the cardinal that what's happening in this country is it is sinful. It is very clearly demonic in his mind, and that ultimately, and I don't know if you caught this in the article, but his whole argument is that what's happening in this country is going to hurt our future generations, that what we're doing is we're hurting ourselves, even while we think we're helping ourselves. So if you listen to the classic line of the liberal side of the aisle, you're hearing people say, we must include. People are being hurt. They're being excluded. They're being hated. Their lives matter. We need to bring comfort and care to these people. And his argument, as most of the black and white Africans, is, no, you don't understand. When you start letting same-sex couples say that they're married and start raising kids, that actually is going to hurt that child. When you start telling people they can live together, that's going to hurt. Anytime you step outside of God's ordinances, you're going to inflict pain, if not the day that you win that legal battle, then certainly down the road. And these Africans like Sarah look at our country as we're literally performing surgery and disemboweling ourselves as we lay here on the table, and that ultimately we will kill ourselves because we'll create so much pain and suffering in these families. So Paul Ryan takes that and says, yes, we need to strengthen the family. We need religious liberty and we need strong families. What we really need is to turn away from the sin that is causing us to take us to literally part ourselves out here and die.
Right.
But as you said here, Paul Ryan is here as a politician.
Yes.
And he's here. He was not there, probably did not see himself as one who even could speak on those subjects with any authority. But he could speak on legislation, perhaps.
Yeah, and about the need to influence government towards religious freedom and preservation of religious freedom and all. And that's where he came from. He's a good politician. He's, he knows how to.
Well, that's his job is to wrangle the
smooth
house.
words. It's those tickling ears like smooth words that we're warned about in Scripture.
To dovetail off of what Doc was saying here, what Cardinal Sarah says, every human being, like the person of the Trinity, has the capacity to be united with other persons in communion through the bone of charity of the Holy Spirit. The family is a natural preparation and anticipation of the communion that is possible when we are united with God. That is why the devil is so intent on destroying the family. If the family is destroyed, we lose our God-given anthropological foundations and find it more difficult to welcome the saving good news of Jesus Christ, self-giving, fruitful love. Powerful message.
Oh, excellent message. And he gets it. He sees, look, when you see the attack that the family is under in another culture, in Africa, the African culture, and how the demonic activity that goes on in Africa, you're not going to hear Paul Ryan talk about Satan or demons or any of that kind of stuff.
Might be a few in Congress.
Well, they're just not going to use that language because they really, isn't in the reference, in the frame of reference. But in Africa, these people live with this every day. And there are powers and principalities around them that they're battling all the time. And he recognizes this is why we need the Southern Church, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because they still understand that this is spiritual warfare. Mm-hmm. That everything that goes on here has roots in the spiritual warfare that's going on.
So that's why I'm very proud to be a bishop from Africa. I mean, it makes things are very much simpler. When I go upline and I have a question, I usually get a yes or I get a no. I very rarely have indaba. We don't sit around and just talk about it for a long time.
Yeah. Let's
This
negotiate that.
And this is politically I think what people view in this country is that politically we are trying to legislate in inclusivity. We're trying to legislate in equality. Those are the words you hear Hillary Clinton and others say. The reality is what the agenda really is that the devil has is he's legislating out sin. How much legislation can we put together so that sin is no longer sin in this country? And right now, if you look at God's family code of moral sins, we've legislated very nearly we started with divorce, we've gone through the same-sex thing, now we're into gender issues. How much longer will it take before we have successfully, as a nation, legislated out every sin that the Bible includes? I don't think it's going to be very long.
No. Well, it's become a sin to call something sin.
Well, yes.
Yes.
You're a bigot, a homophobe, Islamophobe. There's all sorts of phobes out there right now.
Yeah.
I have a lot of phobes.
Yeah.
We could have a House of Phobes as a new radio show.
But the end result of all of this is, so what are you going to do? I mean, if everything is okay, and if there is no moral underpinning, if there is no Word of God, then ultimately people should just do what they want to do. It should really be your opinion. It's your opinion about whether you're a boy or a girl. So I guess it should be your opinion about whether you, stop at a traffic light, break into a house.
Exactly.
I mean, the end result of this kind of thinking is that each is given over to his own devices.
Right.
Which I think, as the Bible says, is the way the world ends.
Yeah.
So
pretty much.
Glad to see we're on the way to that. Come Jesus.
Yeah. Well, no, and it's fascinating. This happened up on Capitol Hill. This is part of the discussion. I guess this is an annual. There's several different prayer breakfasts.
Yeah,
National,
that's right.
the national prayer
the
breakfast
national prayer
is,
breakfast, the Catholic prayer breakfast. I guess you
Christians like breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. And but to bring in, I don't know who set the agenda, but to bring in Cardinal Sarah to speak here was an act of brilliance, as far as I'm concerned. That's very powerful that he was able to use that platform, and with the courage with which he presented the truth. In fact, he refers to that. He says, the battle to preserve the roots of mankind is perhaps the greatest challenge our world has faced since its origin. And he told the crowd of nearly 1,000 people, and Catholics should follow the courageous example of St. John the Baptist. Listen to this: a martyr for the sanctity of marriage, Sarah said. Did you ever think?
Never ever considered that until I read this article, and I had to stop and think, what's he talking about? Then
think about Herodotus, and
it was amazing. It was brilliant.
Yeah. I'd never thought about that either, until this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, thank you for that.
He also says, advanced societies, including, I regret, this nation, have done and continue to do everything possible to legalize such situations, but this can never be a truthful solution. It's like putting bandages on the infected wound. It will continue to poison the body until antibiotics are taken.
That's exactly the point. That's his position. We are poisoning our own body.
Yeah.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and also Bishop Doc Loomis, and we'll have more to come in just a moment. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. And we're talking about, in this segment, this is out of the Washington Times. It actually was on several different news sites this past week. The headline is Catholic Bishops Slam Obama's Disturbing Transgender Bathroom Order. It's by Bradford Richardson. The Washington Times says 2 prominent Catholic bishops on Monday denounced President Obama's order compelling public schools to allow restroom and locker room use on the basis of gender identity rather than sex. The statement issued by Bishop Richard Malone of Buffalo and Archbishop George Lucas, who are both committee chairmen of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, cites church teaching reiterated by Pope Francis last month in his apostolic exhortation, how do you say that? Amoris, his apostolic teaching from
Amoris Laetitia.
Laetitia. Okay. The guidance issued May 13th by the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education that treats a student's gender identity as a student's sex is deeply disturbing, the bishop said in a statement. The guidance fails to address a number of important concerns and contradicts a basic understanding of human formation so well expressed by Pope Francis that the young need to be helped to accept their own body as it was created. This is a statement again from the 2 members of the National Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops, U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and Doc, this is obviously slamming against this reach, which Governor Pat McCrory. I mean, this all comes back to North Carolina's bill, and then it goes further back to Charlotte's ordinance, and further back still to the activists that sought to get Charlotte's ordinance go. And
well, it actually Houston could.
Oh yeah, Houston
follow
had that.
The trail
we go,
to
yeah,
Houston,
and we have that one too. So, so this overreach by the federal government, or would you call it that?
Into my bathroom and my pants? Yes, I would say that's just slightly overreaching. Yes. I'm sorry. I remember. I was just thinking about it. But when I was little, my mother and father were like most mothers and fathers. They did not, or at least of the 50s, they did not talk about sex at all. And I remember my mother giving me a couple of books when I was quite young. One was called Sex, Sense, and Nonsense. And another one was, when I was even younger, it was simply called What Is That? And the book, I think there was a What Is That for boys and a What Is That for girls, if I remember correctly. And fortunately, she guessed right and gave me the What Is That for boys. And it was an explanation of the beauty of my body and what things were and why I had them and why the girls didn't have them. I thought that, and to me, that was excellent parenting. Now that book would be like 1 page long. It'd be, what is that? And the answer would be, it doesn't matter.
Depends on what do you think it is.
Yeah, what do you think it is? Exactly.
It isn't what you think it is.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because you say that. I think my parents' very subtle way of talking about sex was to leave the Time magazine, or Life magazine thing on
special
birth.
Congo edition.
Yeah. but it was a special thing about birth.
About birth. Yes.
Yeah. So left that on the table for me to peruse at some point in time. All right, but it does come down to, as we had talked about in an earlier segment, Robert, about family and what our family's responsibility and what are we giving over? What are we giving over? What are we abdicating from our families and churches?
The very essence of what faith is all about, our Christian faith is all about, quite frankly. This is how direct, this is a direct attack on the Creator God, and that everything, I used to say, I knew God was going to make a mistake, and it would be with me. And that can do that jokingly, but because God doesn't make mistakes. Now there are all kinds of things that happen in the process of a fallen world,
right? That
happens, and the original creation was not like it is now, and there are all kinds of, if you want to say, consequences of sin that go beyond just an emotional position. But this is it. This is just as in the previous segment we were doing, where we were talking about how the Catholic Church is reacting to this. These 2 bishops have hit the same chord. They are recognizing that, and Pope Francis as well, that there is a link, very powerful link between your body and your mind. You can't separate those things. You have to be so careful when you're talking about this in Christianity, because we can kind of overstate it sometime, and that the body is to be discarded and all of this. Well, no, actually, in the whole grand scheme of things, we get the body back later on, and it's purified, and it's incorruptible. Now it's corruptible. And so there's this whole theology built around this. And for a president to come in or anyone to come in and say, never mind, don't worry about that, we're just going to take care of this, it's just such an overreach that someone, it's interesting. The next one of the articles, hopefully we'll talk about later, is the backlash to this. Is that we're seeing a pushback beginning, and in the pushback, there is in itself a pushback. There are people saying, no, church stays out of government. If you want to talk about church stuff, just go to your church to do it. Don't get involved with the government. And the Catholic Church and their friend Billy Graham's son Franklin and everybody else is saying, no, get involved. Get involved.
Now, here we have you mentioned about pushback, and here is the one that's theological. I mean, this is the theological pushback from the Catholic bishops, as opposed to the political pushback. For example, Paul Ryan or Governor McCrory or the Texas lieutenant governor who said, "Keep your money."
Right.
He says, "We're not doing this," and all of these on the political side, it's follow the money. That's the threat. Is that Title IX funding, any other funding that we've given over to the federal government and expect to get it back is not going to come back if you don't follow these edicts. But Doc, here I think what is illuminating here is that this isn't about the money side. This is all about the theological side, about where we stand on supporting our family and our faith.
Yes, a lot of people took apart the Pope's MRS writings and saw in it that we needed to be careful not to speak poorly of those, regardless of how they think about themselves or what kinds of relationships they're in, but to love them and nurture them and provide them the counseling they needed, etc. And they took that and said, oh, good, now the Pope's all on board with the LGBT agenda or the whatever agenda they happen to be representing. That's not really the case. If you read closely what the Pope said, what he actually said when it came to things like same-sex marriage, he said, we want to promote stable commitments that produce new fruit in life, and that the LGBT agenda cannot provide that, and that's what our world needs, and that's what our country needs. A stable commitment that provides fruit through new life. He views that as that's how we were created by the Lord, and that's what his commitment is.
And he remains, even despite the criticism, he remains orthodox with that commitment. I mean, that's an orthodox position.
Yes,
right?
and so it is rightly the position of the family. I mean, that's what we call it here. That's what Paul Ryan is talking about when he talks about the family. The family matters. That's what in our last segment Archbishop Sarah is saying. It's the family unit. That's what it is.
It even goes to the point that the scriptures tell us the model of the family is more than just a good model of how relationships work within society. It actually reflects on the Trinity.
Right. That was his message.
That was in that last article. Right?
That it is this. You can't unlink this to the Trinitarian position, and so what is the hypocrisy of this suggestion that has come from the administration is that
a strong arm suggestion. Yes,
it is. It's a strong arm, and who is going to be hurt by this? If North Carolina, let's say, decides to, or Texas, to give up their federal funds because of this, that's the leverage they have, right? I mean, that was pretty clear. Who's going to get hurt by that? The very people that they're claiming that they're trying to help. They don't want anyone hurt. But these funds
Title 7, Title 9.
I mean, it's breakfast programs.
Right.
I mean, this is a lot of money that was given to support these people in need and, struggling with their education or whatever it is. So what? They're gone. It really is so short-sighted.
But it points out, again, when we give over that kind of power, it's because, frankly, who would be feeding children, or who would be feeding and who would be providing some of these ideas if we weren't handing this responsibility over?
Well, the church.
The church would be.
Absolutely.
So
or the family would be. I mean, that's the other part of the crisis. Is there's now it used to be if you were hungry you worked. Right. Now if you're hungry you can go stand in a line and apply.
Right.
Yeah.
And the church would applaud families that do it and encourage families and try to make that that an element of the church.
Yeah. The community safety net,
right,
which includes the church.
Yeah.
Right.
So again, this is really a battle that is going to be going on for quite some time, I believe. Even into future administrations, it could very, very easily handle that. So we'll have more to come in a moment here on our final segment coming up on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. Our final segment today, we want to take a look at something that's been a controversy ever since he announced his decision to do this tour, the Decision America Tour, and it's from Franklin Graham. And here's an article about a rally in Jefferson City, Missouri. It says, thousands attend Graham's Decision America Tour at Missouri Capitol. Despite a downpour of bone-chilling rain, a mass of people came to Jefferson City Tuesday for a chance to hear Franklin Graham speak on his Decision America Tour. Graham, son of the pastor who's been encouraging people on the nationwide tour to get involved in government and politics, as Christians, and his appearance in Missouri and his message, judging from the turnout and active crowd, was well received. He denounced the current state of the nation, primarily what he referred to as its moral failings, like the continuation of abortion and legitimization of same-sex marriage. He also said that secularism had replaced communism as the primary enemy of the nation. The quote from Franklin Graham in his speech was, "We need men and women who will honor God. America has been stripped of its biblical heritage." I just noticed the typo in that first sentence and didn't say Billy Graham. Yeah. But obviously you know who he is. Franklin Graham, again, is the son of Billy Graham. And now the Kansas City Star published an op-ed piece that came out actually before this particular rally, but it was in conjunction with his Decision America tour. It says it's by Yael Abu Halka. I'm going to come close to that, I think. Anyway, it says, a few weeks ago, Franklin Graham, the son of a televangelist Billy Graham, was ranting this nonsense to a crowd in Topeka, Kansas. We need Christian politicians. We need Christians in politics so they'll bring God into politics. As a Christian, I adamantly say, no, we don't. What this country really needs to become far more successful in keeping God out of politics at the local, state, and national levels. Well, two diametrically opposed positions here. And let's see where we might fall on this, either on the sword or on the side of one of these, right? Robert, you are active in this subject, I think, often with us. So tell me, what do you think about both the Franklin Graham idea of taking this Decision America tour out, and then the critique of it?
Yeah. From the American point of view, Franklin Graham has every right to be able to go out and do this kind of thing, whatever he wants to do. I mean, that's what is the backbone of American freedom, is that we have freedom of speech and that we can go out and do these things. And that's what is so disturbing to me, is that now I know it's been a long time, but back when I was a liberal, when I was college and right after college, I would defend everyone's right to be able to speak, regardless of whether they were a Christian or not. I mean, that was what we thought was and in fact, the liberals were the ones who were championing that position that everyone needs to have the right to speak. But now that it's reversed, and they're the ones that are crying for censorship. And I'm speaking now not of Billy Graham. I'm speaking of the other gentleman that wrote the article. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name.
but it's also interesting because we always see this and how it's covered in the Missouri the Missouri Times. It's a short article, but in the Missouri Times article it says fundamentalists and evangelicals filled the South Lawn. Well, really, did they survey that? Is that would that count, or would it just be people who were interested, curious?
They had their little
Americans
badges on that said fundamentalists or evangelical.
Is there a color for that? Is there a color ribbon for that or anything else for that? So but it's an assumption that's often made that then helps to couch how you're going to consider.
That's right. That's right.
And now this critique of it in the Kansas City Star is that no, Christians should be against this kind of behavior.
But everybody else is for this kind of behavior. Look, we're a nation, and whatever group you're a part of, your constituency wants to get together and say why. I mean, take this first line from the article and insert the word or the abbreviation LGBT. He was ranting this nonsense to a crowd in Topeka, Kansas. We need LGBT politicians. We need LGBT in politics so that they can have inclusivity in politics. Mm-hmm. Now, if an LGBT group did that, everybody would applaud. Everybody would be hysterically happy. Yes, we do. We'd never thought of that. We need more of our type of people in there so that we are better represented. But when Christians say that, all of a sudden it's raining nonsense in Topeka. Yeah. All of a sudden it's bigoted.
It's a rant.
It is a rant. And so why is that? How? That's the beauty. This article, written by the inclusivity crowd on the far left side of the media juggernaut that is now running our media, this far left rant is talking about, he's calling a man names for saying, I would like to see more of our constituents in office, more people like ourselves in office. And he's calling them all sorts of names. I thought we were all about inclusivity. Mm-hmm. How do you call Franklin Graham a name like this?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
In the name of Christ, this is from this critique editorial again. In the name of Christ, too many issues have been embraced in recent times. Among them, a bogus religious freedom bill in Missouri, a bigoted bathroom law in effect in North Carolina and being sought in other states, pro-life efforts to defund Planned Parenthood in Missouri, Kansas, and elsewhere, and the fake welfare reform laws that cut off meager funds that help feed poor men, women, and children.
This is like talking points. I'm sorry. This guy has obviously just
has a fax machine.
Yeah. somebody sent this out and he's just regurgitating it and not even thinking about what he's saying.
Not even, this is not being thought about or written in a Christian manner.
No.
I immediately look at what this guy is writing, and when he says, as a Christian, I adamantly say no. What? As what kind of a Christian are you? What kind of a Christian speaks like this?
Yeah.
Calls names and stuff like this. I got some really significant issues in the discernment of the Spirit about whether this guy actually understands what it means to be a Christian person.
Yeah. You would have to say that, wouldn't you? Yep, that's true.
You want to express your religious conscience? Go to your church and do so.
Correct.
This is another area, we brought this up before, where the idea is not the free expression of religion, but the freedom to worship. You can, as long as you're in your building, then we don't really care what you say. Well, that's not true either. But we don't really care. We're going to pretend like we don't care.
Yeah. But don't you dare go out in public and talk about these things, because you are offending me. And this guy's obviously very offended.
Well, obviously he's offended. And frankly, we offend people when we do stupid things. Now, and I'm going to, this show will air on Sunday morning. I plan to be in front of my house so that it doesn't get torched after I say this. But I actually don't like this idea of electing Christian politicians. I like the idea of allowing people to elect politicians to do what politicians do. The church's job is to help those politicians see the light that is Christ and convert them and save them for eternity. This is the challenge I have with all these rallies, these big political rallies. Why don't we just encourage our congregations to go out and make converts? Why don't we just encourage our congregations to be ambassadors for Christ? I mean, that's really the thing that Jesus asked us to do. He didn't say group up and overthrow the government. He could have done it. He didn't do it. Instead, he said, go out and make disciples. And I think right now, and that's the irony of this, is that Billy Graham, that was his message. Let's go make disciples. Let's get baptized. Franklin has taken this in another direction, which is clearly a political movement. And I don't have a huge problem with it, but we've forgotten to talk about.
But it should be critiqued.
Well, again, we've forgotten to talk about going out and changing lives with the gospel.
You know, it is. I think there's a difference.
Do you smell smoke?
No, but I think I'm with you on this point that we don't need to necessarily elect Christian politicians, but politicians who are Christians who are okay. Because if it's an idea that I'm going to self-identify, to use that phrase now, as a Christian and I'm a politician, then is that then without question? Do we not wonder if there's a discernment there to it? I think we certainly have with Donald Trump. We've brought that discernment to it when he says 2 Corinthians. Are we really?
But wouldn't it be wonderful if he was converted his first year? I mean, the greatest story of that is John Kasich.
Yeah.
Here's John Kasich, a nice man by all measure. He's running, a government in the state of Ohio, later to be running for president. But one day, a guy walks in and tells him about Jesus, and it completely changes everything about him. That's the impact I think as Christians we want to have, is to impact our leaders for Christ. Does that make sense?
Yes, but the difference is that we're seeing an administration where that door is closed. That door is not going to be open for somebody to walk in and say that and have that impact on somebody. This kind of, the sort of overreach that we've seen, and I'm sure that's, Franklin Graham wants to kick that door down, but I think it doesn't mean that we don't critique that position.
Well, at least
but
the bathroom.
I'd rather have his position though than the other.
Well, it definitely gives us something to pray about.
Well, at least the bathroom doors will be open.
We'll have more to come next week here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I hope you'll join us then. And thanks to Reverend Robert Cornigan, Bishop Doc Loomis, I'm Ben Ball.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.